Hey guys, tonight we're starting with a beauty standard that by modern logic sounds more like a medical concern than a compliment. We're talking about the pale, nearly colorless skin of medieval nobility. A look so revered that women were willing to smear poison on their faces just to achieve it. So before you get truly comfortable, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And leave a comment to let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. I always love seeing who's joining this sleepy journey worldwide. Now turn off the lights, turn on a gentle fan if you like the soft hum, and let's slip quietly into tonight's story. In the Middle Ages, beauty wasn't tied to vitality. The ideal look was the absence of life. A face pale as parchment, untouched by sunlight or blemish, was considered the height of nobility. Confusing, understandable. Today, a tanned glow often signals health, activity, and maybe even wealth. But back in the 14th century, dark skin meant you labored under the sun. And labor, especially manual labor, meant you were not among the upper class. In a society where status clung to the skin, complexion became a silent language of class. The paler you were, the more luxurious your life was presumed to be. The older you got without sun damage, the more privileged your existence. Pale skin became a kind of signature that didn't need ink. Of course, not everyone was born with the right shade. That's where the art of whitening began. The most popular and most dangerous method, white lead. Ground into powder mixed with rose water or oil, this paste was applied to the face to create a soft, matte finish. The result was pale, smooth skin and slow corrosion. Many noble women lived with peeling, blistered, or even scarred skin. But as long as they looked refined, it was worth it. Other formulas included egg whites mixed with crushed pearls, powdered eggshell, gypsum powder, and even breadcrumbs, all in pursuit of that chalky, lifeless effect. No pinks, no glow, just absence. And if you still didn't feel delicate enough, you could draw on fake veins. Noble women painted light blue lines on their necks, hands, or chests to mimic visible veins beneath translucent skin. The idea was that noble skin should be so fine you could see the blood beneath it. Any sign of muscle tone or a suntan was considered vulgar. Poetry of the time praised skin like first snow, pale as a winter moon, and cheeks faded like sacred ash. Paleness was eternal, paleness was pure. The link between appearance and morality wasn't accidental. The medieval church encouraged the ideal of a modest, quiet woman. Pale skin symbolized a clean soul, untainted by earthly sins. Rosy cheeks or bright eyes, suspicious signs of emotion. Emotion, especially in women, was considered dangerous. That's why makeup had to be subtle. Blush could be acceptable, but only if it looked like, "I just thought of God and blushed." A beautiful woman was expected to smile modestly, lower her eyes at the right time, avoid direct gazes, and never laugh out loud. Beauty, it was believed, didn't need to be expressed. It simply needed to exist, like a faint scent in a quiet room. And men, oh, they had their part to play. While they didn't wear white lead, noblemen in court still maintained their faces, clean, even-toned and unsissed by the sun. A dry, composed face in the king's presence was a virtue. The strange part is everyone knew it was poison. There were documented cases of blistering, blindness, and even death from lead poisoning. But they kept going. Because in a world where beauty determined your survival, even deadly skin was a price worth paying if it opened the door to a noble marriage. And this is only the beginning of the story. If you thought medieval obsession with pale skin was peak ridiculousness and beauty standards, well, now I invite you to look up, literally toward the noble, gleaming foreheads of the Middle Ages. No, I'm not joking. Tonight we're talking about one of the strangest and most expansive beauty ideals in history. The high forehead. Not high as in I'm intellectually gifted. High as in there's a whole empty field above your eyebrows. The more blank forehead space, the more beautiful you were considered. And if you weren't naturally born with a receding hairline, no problem. Medieval women had solutions. And those solutions began with plucking, specifically plucking the hairline to push the brow boundary further back. Many women voluntarily sacrificed the front of their hair forever to achieve that coveted noble brow. Some even used hot beeswax to strip the area above their eyes. Others went at it strand by strand, tending to their foreheads like a garden, only instead of growing something. The goal was to make sure nothing ever rose again. Why? In medieval aesthetics, a high brow signified wisdom and virtue. It made the face look elevated, serene, and nobler than thou. In short, the more room above your eyes, the more room it looked like you had for intelligence. And if you didn't, sorry, you better get to plucking. Even in religious paintings, the Virgin Mary is sometimes shown with her eyebrows stretched halfway up her scalp. And when religion canonizes a beauty trend, well, secular women take the hint. So brow lifting became a vital part of the beauty routine. After whitening the skin, rubbing in ground gems, and painting on faint blue veins, the next step was eliminating expression. Starting with the eyebrows, because eyebrows, with all their fur, movement, and opinions, were considered far too wild. Ideal beauty had no sharp cliffs or sudden valleys. And the eyebrows, they were the loudest feature on your face, arching up, angling down, emoting left and right, all too individualistic. So the answer, scrape them clean. And scrape they did. Countless portraits from the 15th and 16th centuries show smooth, featureless foreheads stretching from eyelid to scalp. No brows, no bangs, just white skin, blank and silent like paper awaiting orders. Picture this. Each morning you wake up, glance in the mirror, and if you seem a little too expressive, it's time to grab the cloth, warm the wax, and start re-erasing yourself one follicle at a time. You might ask, why go through all that pain? Because in medieval society, women owned no property, had no political rights, and often couldn't choose their husbands, but they could decide how they looked. And sometimes how you looked was the only leverage you had in shaping your future. A high forehead wasn't just beautiful, it said, I belong to the elite. It was a silent statement that you didn't work outdoors, didn't bend your head in submission, and have nothing to hide. Your face was a wide, clean page, ready to be written on by the man you didn't choose. And heaven help you if you had thick hair, low brows, or bold eyebrow arches. You might be labeled unruly, opinionated, or unfit for marriage. In some places, a woman with lush eyebrows was thought to be distracted, too sensual, or not serious enough. And in a world where being too enthusiastic could knock you out of the wife category, your brows could betray you. So strand by strand, the hairline receded. Not because it was ugly, but because society had decided that true beauty lay absence. To the medieval mind, the brow was the main stage of the face. It had to be wide, quiet, and uninterrupted by anything that grew. And like every other piece of beauty in this world, the goal wasn't to be alluring, but to be allowed. Because being beautiful wasn't enough. If you were stunning in the wrong way, you could still be judged, dismissed, or punished. And we're just getting started. In medieval society, facial hair on women was seen as an unfortunate mistake of nature. A beautiful woman, by the standards of the time, needed skin as smooth as beeswax. No fuzz, no shine, and absolutely nothing that might remind anyone she was in fact a real person. And so from a very young age, women tried everything to erase the face, not just for beauty, but for honor. As we mentioned, eyebrows were removed to emphasize the forehead, but that was just the beginning. The upper lip, the chin, the cheeks, even the soft fuzz beneath the eyes. Anything that interrupted the angelic ideal had to go. There were no stainless steel tweezers or precision waxing kits. Instead, noble women relied on raw razors, boiling beeswax, or strange pastes made from mustard powder and lime, slathered on the skin like hair removal cream, and rinsed off with river water. Some sources even recorded detailed recipes. Mix white plaster with camel urine and rose water. Apply to the hairy area, let dry, and scrape off with a bronze knife. Whether it worked or not was beside the point. Finding a camel in Europe was already heroic. Of course, the results were mixed. Some women experienced burns, infections, or permanent skin damage. But as with whitening the face, pain was simply part of the price, and perfection was the prize. And it wasn't just noble women. Peasant girls copied the trend too with fewer resources. They used twisted thread to pluck, charcoal ash to scrub, or even worn-down razor blades to trim just enough. Some rubbed their skin with pumice stone until it looked clean, even if it hurt. Why so intense? Because facial hair on women was often tied to sin, temptation, and shame. A mustache hinted at masculinity, and masculinity in the medieval imagination was not something you wanted sneaking onto a woman's face. Women were supposed to be pure, quiet, and polished. The smoother the skin, the closer to heaven. And angels, at least the ones in paintings, never had mustaches. One eyebrow-raising detail. Medieval moral guides warned that a woman who keeps hair on her face cannot be trusted to keep her virtue or her household. At this point, beauty wasn't just about appearance. It had become a matter of morality. A single hair could ruin a marriage proposal in a world where women were judged at first glance. So smooth skin wasn't just pretty, it was necessary. It was your entry ticket to the dance floor, your passport to a respectable marriage, or at the very least, a way to avoid being called the devil's wife. The tragic irony, the more a woman erased herself to look like a doll instead of a person, the less she was seen as human, the more refined she appeared. The easier it was to forget she had a voice, a mind, or a soul. Just look at portraits from the period. You'll see a familiar pattern. Porcelain skin, poreless and matte, no eyebrows, no lashes, small closed lips, towering foreheads, eyes half-lidded. It was a template. Beautiful. Yes, but hollow. A kind of beauty that was produced, not lived. As you lie in bed and lightly touch your cheek tonight, you might feel a few fine hairs. Don't worry, no one will whisper about you over breakfast. No one will measure the smoothness of your skin. But if you'd lived in the 14th century, those tiny hairs could have determined your entire fate. And this was just the beginning. Because medieval beauty didn't stop at the face, the entire body had to obey. The underarms were not allowed to rebel. The hands had to be soft, the elbows never rough, and the waist, the smaller the better. If today a tiny waist is admired, then a small waist wasn't just a compliment in the Middle Ages. It was a social proclamation, a silent message that said, I don't do anything, I don't eat much, and I certainly don't breathe too deeply. Ideal beauty wasn't about health or vitality, it was about fragility. The goal was to have a waist so small that two hands could encircle it, the gold standard of medieval delicacy. And to achieve that, medieval women had a secret weapon, the corset, or its early ancestor. Please don't confuse it with the dramatic hourglass corsets of later centuries. These early versions were stiff, heavy, often made of hardened linen, tight laces, and sometimes even whalebone inserts. The goal, compress the torso as tightly as possible. Girls began training with these garments from puberty. At first, gently just to get used to the pressure. Then gradually, the laces were drawn tighter and tighter until the body stopped resisting. At that point, you were deemed ready. Some young women were even proud of how tightly they could lace up, so much so they could barely breathe, passing out during Mass, a sign of refinement. And once revived, you might even be praised for being so graceful. Not everyone took it so delicately, of course. Girls who couldn't tolerate the pressure and refused their families often scolded the corset. For many noble mothers, teaching their daughters to have a tiny waist was like teaching them to knock politely. It was part of the social script. Medical texts from the period describe dislocated ribs, internal bruising, and long-term breathing problems caused by corset compression. But these were dismissed as the cost of femininity. The corset also reshaped behavior. Because it restricted the body's motion, women couldn't bend easily. Every movement had to be slow, small, and gentle, like they were floating. And that was the point. The corset wasn't just clothing, it was training. It created women who appeared to glide, not stomp. But there's another darker layer to this obsession with the waist. It was tied to sexual control. The smaller the waist, the more well-behaved a woman was considered. People believed that women who ate less, breathed softly, and stayed physically delicate also had fewer desires. And fewer desires meant easier to manage. One 14th century manuscript even included a poem, a wife whose breath is caged inside. Her words won't stray too far or wide, one verse, and yet it speaks volumes about the beliefs of the time. But not every woman could achieve that dream waist. Those with fuller bodies were called greedy, clumsy, or undisciplined. Some were even rejected for marriage because a roll of fat peeked out when they sat down. And if you're thinking, can't she just wear loose clothes to hide it? Not so easy. Medieval fashion often did the opposite. In many regions of Europe, wedding gowns were designed to highlight the waist. Tight bodices with wide, flaring skirts, creating that coveted hourglass illusion. But even the tiniest bit of visible flesh between the ribs and hips could ruin the whole effect. So women prepared for important events by starving themselves, drinking bitter herbal teas to cleanse, or even binding themselves overnight to ensure they were slim enough by morning. There are medical records of girls suffering internal damage from overly tight lacing or fainting in the summer heat from restricted breathing. But the pain, the fragility, it was considered charming. At lavish feasts, if a young lady swooned mid-conversation, gently clutching her chest and collapsing into her mother's arms, that was seen as perfectly feminine. No one questioned it. She might be complimented on her delicacy. Of course, you and I know that real elegance doesn't mean passing out in public. But at the time, what we might call weakness, they called grace. And as always, it was about control. Because a woman who was small, gentle, and breathless was the ideal wife. Less resistant, less impulsive, and most importantly, I am always in need of help, which of course is exactly how they wanted her. So tonight, as you lie back and take a deep breath, feel your stomach rise, soft, relaxed, and unbound by anyone's expectations. Know that you live in an age where breathing deeply is not a moral issue. But if you had lived in the 14th century, that breath might have been seen as too bold. In medieval society, where appearance was a powerful secondary language, a woman's legs were no exception to the beauty rankings. But here's the twist and the headache. Legs were expected to be long, but never seen. Sound contradictory? That's because it was. A beautiful pair of legs was something to be admired, but not to be revealed. If someone accidentally caught a glimpse of your ankle, good heavens, that was enough to fill 3 pages of public confession. At the time, women's fashion typically involved floor-length gowns, often layered and heavy. Not because of the cold, but because of reputation. Even indoors, women were embarrassed if part of their legs showed. In some places, it was even considered improper for a woman to step outside without someone walking ahead to block potential glances. Still, the idea of beautiful legs persisted quietly. As a shared secret, everyone understood. In medieval aesthetics, beautiful legs were long and slim, with delicate ankles and smooth knees, though no one was meant to see them. Instead, people judged through movement. A girl who walked softly with even steps without swaying her hips too much or lifting her skirts too high was considered to have graceful, discreet legs. But if her stride was too quick, "Oh, her legs must be thick," whispered a nearby noble woman behind her fan. There was essentially a collective imagination around women's legs. Aristocrats held tea parties where ladies sat with perfect posture, never crossing their legs, while men sat across the room, imagining. Everything was inferred from posture. How one mounted a horse, or the angle of a polite bow. One OFL tale involves a nobleman falling in love with a woman simply because she stepped through a doorway without disturbing a lily petal. That level of body control, utterly intoxicating. Of course, not everyone was born with an advantageous structure. Some girls had shorter legs, an awkward gait, or simply weren't naturally poised, and they were deemed less graceful, even though no one saw their legs. So to improve the imagination score, medieval women employed a few tricks. 1. Wooden platform shoes add height and elongate the silhouette. The downside, walking on cobblestones, became a balancing act. 2. Bending the knees slightly while sitting to prevent wrinkles in the gown and preserve that smooth, demure look. 3. Practicing tiny, careful steps so the hem of the dress moved rhythmically, mimicking the subtle motion of elegant legs underneath. If by chance a bit of ankle did flash into view, the response could be dramatic. Men might blush, other women might faint from shock. There are records of girls being reprimanded for stepping out of a carriage at the wrong angle. Worse still, if the leg glimpsed was deemed rough or showed calluses from walking too much, the label peasant was slapped on without mercy. And as you know, peasant women may have been kind, resourceful and strong, but they were never the beauty ideal. In contrast, noble women who never had to step beyond their front door were sometimes praised for having swan-like legs. Dreamy, absolutely, because it was pure speculation. Some love poems of the time described women's legs in purely imaginary terms. She walks like wind through the forest, her gown a whisper on moonlit skin. That is a lovely verse, but think about it. What wind goes through a forest without blowing up a skirt? Still, that's the power of imagination. Legs didn't need to appear. The mere suggestion of them was enough to create a beauty standard. And once again, beauty wasn't in the body itself. It was in where the body was hidden. So tonight, as you lie down and stretch out your calves under a soft blanket, know that you're enjoying a simple freedom that medieval women never had. The right to have legs and to let them exist without shame. In the Middle Ages, large breasts were not considered a symbol of attractiveness. They were often viewed as a bit much, too earthly, provocative, and easily blamed for leading morality astray. The ideal instead was small and modest, especially for young, unmarried women. So are you picturing rosy, cheeked maidens with ample bosoms spilling from their gowns? Sorry, that's Renaissance-era fantasy, not 13th century reality. In the medieval period, depictions of feminine beauty typically showed a practically non-existent chest. No curves, cleavage, or emphasis. Just a smooth, unbroken surface hidden beneath layers of fabric, lace, and virtue. And if nature didn't bless you with the modest silhouette of the times, don't worry. Society has plenty of ways to help you shrink yourself. Medieval women practiced some truly inventive and sometimes alarming flattening techniques. One of the most common was binding, using tightly wrapped cloths, belts, or linen vests to compress the chest every morning, often so tightly that deep breaths were a luxury. The goal wasn't just to hide the shape and halt development altogether, because growing curves meant maturity, and maturity meant desire, and desire was unbecoming. There are even accounts of noble mothers instructing their daughters to sleep with small sandbags pressed against their chests to train the body to remain flat. Sounds harsh. They called it proper sleep. In some regions, light wooden chest plates were worn, resembling lightweight armor, except instead of protecting against enemies, it protected against growing up. Of course, all of these methods were cloaked in the language of virtue, modesty, decency, and moral refinement. A beautiful woman wasn't supposed to attract attention, especially not there. And if she did, clearly something had gone wrong. Even in religious art, the Virgin Mary was frequently depicted with a chest so smooth and untouched that it looked more divine mannequin than a nursing mother. Even when she was shown breastfeeding, it was painted as an act of holy service, not biology. No curve, no sensuality, no emotion, just sacred maternal duty. Women wore high necklines, long sleeves, and triple-layered bodices in everyday life. The chest was protected like treasure, not because it was precious, but because it was perilous. And yet, despite all that hiding, the chest remained one of the most talked-about parts of a woman's body. If you simply moved too quickly, or your breathing caused even a hint of visible motion, someone was bound to comment that you lacked self-control. And if a woman couldn't control herself, how could she be trusted to run a household? This led to a strange paradox. Women were expected to do everything possible to be socially attractive and conceal everything that might attract them. And so the breasts, which are, after all, just another part of the body, became a battleground of virtue and judgment. Flattened, hidden, but never forgotten. If you think men didn't care, oh, they did, but no one would dare say it aloud. Instead, they wrote poetry. Many medieval poems speak of breasts like stones beneath morning dew, or her heart serene as a lake at dusk, or a chest that doesn't rise like waves but rests like unshaken faith. No one's sure they were describing a real woman or a beautifully carved shelf. Tonight, as you lie on your side and feel your body move naturally with each breath, Smile at the thought that you're not living in an age where even the rhythm of your chest was considered indecent. In the Middle Ages, the ideal mouth for a woman was small, closed and quiet, like a prayer never spoken aloud. Not small in the sense of dainty or cute, but small enough that it couldn't project loudly, laugh freely, and certainly couldn't argue, especially not with one's husband. An ideal pair of lips, according to the literature of the time, were thin as a thread, soft pink like a morning sky, and most importantly, always sealed in serene modesty. Yes, the perfect mouth was one rarely used, a smile handled with care. Smiling too freely was seen as a lack of restraint. A loud laugh that showed your teeth that could be interpreted as vulgar. Picture this. You're at a feast. Someone tells a joke. If you let out a polite he safe, but if you laugh, ha ha. Dear heavens, the noble woman across the table might glance over as if you just swore in Latin. There were rules for how women should laugh, only with the eyes, or at most a slight lift of the right corner of the mouth, never both sides. Some etiquette guides advised women to hold a handkerchief near the lips when laughing so that grace would not become garish. In other words, don't let people see your teeth. Speaking of teeth, they had to be white, small, neat, and preferably unseen. That's why many noble ladies adopted the habit of gently pursing their lips as if holding on to a secret, or silently resisting the urge to say anything at all. And lipstick highly regulated. Bold colors, suspective witchcraft. Naturally rosy lips could suggest overactive desire, which of course was a problem. The safest choice was a neutral, understated tint. To achieve that, women turned to surprisingly creative methods. Dabbing crushed mustard flowers to achieve a soft blush, or dusting lips with powder if they appeared too pink. It was a constant battle between not enough and just enough, but never too much. Like so many parts of the medieval female form, the mouth was also a moral symbol. A woman who spoke too often or boldly was described as having a wide mouth, a sharp tongue, and most certainly wasn't wife material. By contrast, women with small, quiet mouths were praised as peaceful as vespers, gentle as unopened roses, or most tellingly, unlikely to contradict their husband. Sound absurd, certainly. But when society agrees that the size of a woman's mouth can be used to measure her obedience, things have gone off the rails. And it didn't stop at the polite suggestion. Some religious teachings at the time warned, a woman with a wide mouth speaks falsehoods. Temptation begins at the lips and ends in the ears of weak men. In that logic, the mouth wasn't just for eating or speaking. It became the gateway to sin. Of course, there were rebellious women. Those who laughed loudly, argued fiercely, and didn't mind being heard. But history rarely celebrated them. They were labeled unruly, unmarriageable, or worse, unfit for Christian life. The eyes, yes, the eyes, the windows to the soul. But in the Middle Ages, they were more like shutters. Not to be opened too wide, not to linger too long, and not to meet someone's gaze, especially if you were a woman. Back then, beauty standards demanded that a woman's eyes be downcast, never direct, and never too expressive. Because even a glance, if held the wrong way, could be read as flirtation, rebellion, or at worst, seduction. To avoid that, young girls were taught early how to look with their eyes, but not with their soul. What did that mean? It meant when passing a man, look at his knees. When speaking, keep your eyes on your hands. Do not roll your eyes when listening to the priest preach about sin, not even once. A beautiful woman was not to have a sharp gaze. Her eyes were expected to be dreamy, distant, as though contemplating a hymn, not silently judging someone's poor fashion choices. Indeed, many portraits of idealized medieval women feature the same expression. Eyes lowered, lashes delicate, pupils aimed downward, as if the subject was meditating, or perhaps just enduring life quietly. Eyes that were too intense, unfit for a gentle and virtuous woman. Eyes that seemed to speak even worse. Some sermons warned, a woman need not touch a man to cause his fall. One look from speaking eyes is enough. There's even a tale of a 14th century nobleman who fell madly in love with a girl simply because she never looked at him. He called it a beauty as humble as dust. Maybe she was nearsighted. No one knows. But she was worth admiring as long as she didn't look directly at him. Medieval women went to strange lengths to maintain the correct gaze. Some applied diluted herbal drops to their eyes to create a slightly tear-airy soft effect. Others dusted charcoal around their eyelids, not to seduce, but to make their eyes appear more depthless, more pensive. And heaven forbid they made eye contact that was seen as brazen, rude, even seductive. Just one mistimed glance could get you called before a moral tribunal. In one infamous case, a girl was accused of harboring lust for Christ because she accidentally locked eyes with a priest while dozing off during Mass. The phrase "eyes that speak" was not a compliment back then. It was a caution, a warning. Be careful where you look. Someone might decide what it means for you. Were girls born with eyes that were too large, bright, or expressive? They were trained to dim their sparkle. Some mothers taught their daughters to blink slowly, to gaze gently into space instead of making eye contact. And always remember, the eyes should be the backdrop, never center stage. It's tragic how one of the most powerful tools of sincerity and self-expression became something to suppress, conceal, or be punished for. So tonight, as you rest your eyes and let your whole face relax, remember this. You live in a time where it's okay to look, to meet someone's gaze, to speak volumes with your eyes and not be accused of sin for it. Hair. In medieval society, a woman's long hair was seen as a mark of femininity, virtue, and marital value. But here's the paradox. Your hair had to be very long, healthy, silky, and never visible. Beautiful hair was a private faith, and if anyone besides your husband or your confessor happened to see it, that was your fault, not theirs. So the rules were clear. Hair must reach your back, preferably your waist. It must be smooth as silk, thick as a September cloud, but always tied up, braided, hidden, and covered with as many layers of cloth as possible. You might ask, if no one can see it, what's the point? The answer: to prove moral worth. You were clearly disciplined, modest, and righteous. If you could grow long, beautiful hair and still keep it hidden. Hair was the quiet symbol of character. A girl with thick, shiny black hair was clearly well raised, even if no one but her mother and midwife ever saw it. On the flip side, short hair was punishment. Prostitutes, adulterers, criminals all risked having their heads shaved or their hair cut like a man's. Not just for humiliation, but to erase their femininity. In paintings and church texts, women with loose hair were linked with sin. Witches, harlots, or Eve tempting Adam. One 12th century text even wrote, "The woman who lets her hair fall freely lays down chains for the devil." A bit extreme maybe, but it matched the mindset. Hair was even regulated. Unmarried girls had to braid it into one long plait. Married women had to wear a coif, a cap that covered the entire head, often topped with a veil or scarf. Some mothers made their daughters wear head coverings even while sleeping, not to preserve their hairstyle, but to ensure that even angels flying past wouldn't catch a glimpse. At weddings, one of the most intimate moments was when the bride removed her head covering and revealed her hair to her husband for the first time. It wasn't just romantic, it was a ritual of moral transfer. Some noblemen even agreed to marry based solely on reports about a girl's hair. Heard her hair flows like Levant silk. All right, I'll wet her, and if you were born with thin, frizzy, or sparse hair, no problem. The Middle Ages had remedies. Rinse with wine and egg whites to summon feminine essence. Deep condition with peanut oil and honey, and hope bees don't appear. Rub crushed gemstones into your scalp, assuming you have spare jewels. Whether these worked is unclear, but belief, as we know, was the most abundant substance in medieval Europe, second only to disease. Hair wasn't just decoration, it was a latent aesthetic weapon. Medieval love poems compared a woman's hair to a veil over the heart, a dark maze where men lose themselves, or a shadow that smells faintly of dying roses. In The Romance of the Rose, a love story unfolds after a man sees just one strand of hair escaping a woman's veil. And perhaps the greatest paradox of all, women weren't allowed to flaunt their beauty. But if they weren't beautiful enough to be imagined beneath the fabric, they were still judged. Imagine being told to grow luxurious hair, never let anyone see it, yet still convinced the world it was legendary. Tonight, as you let your hair down, rinse it with warm water, dry it gently, and no one accuses you of tempting Satan, just remember that is a privilege. And your hair, frizzy, tangled, or perfect, doesn't need to be hidden to be worthy. Women's hands in the Middle Ages. Now, a topic full of surprises. Today, you can use your hands to create, work, or scroll through your phone at 2 a.m. But back in the 13th century, a beautiful hand was one that quite literally did nothing. The ideal standard for hands could be summed up like this: long, slender fingers, pale as wax. Soft palms, no calluses, no scratches. Short, lightly pink nails, curved like flower petals, and never touching dirt. The perfect medieval hand didn't need dough, didn't wash clothes, didn't pluck vegetables, didn't weave baskets, didn't scrape soil from a turnip patch. In other words, the beautiful hand was the unnecessary hand. And because of that, hands became a symbol of class. A noble woman only had to extend her hand for people to think, ah, that hand has never touched cold water. Meanwhile, no matter how lovely her face, a peasant girl was deemed too earthy if her hands were thick, her nails chipped, or her fingertips browned by sunlight. Etiquette books of the time gave very specific hand instructions. When seated, never lean your weight on your hand. When speaking, never gesture too wildly. When laughing, conceal your mouth lightly with your fingers, but never reveal a full plump hand. Every movement had to suggest leisure. Hands weren't meant to do things, but to rest artistically. And while today you might book a nail appointment, medieval noble women had their own manicures. Hand powders made from chalk and herbs rinses with rose water, followed by almond oil to keep the skin as soft as a whispered confession. Of course, not everyone had access to powdered eggshell soap, but that only reinforced the beauty ideal. Pretty hands belonged to women rich enough never to lift a finger. A popular 14th century love poem describes a beloved's hand as her hand like morning dew on jade. So delicate I dare not hold it long for fear of spoiling her past. Romantic, yes, realistic not. The irony, of course, is that even though hands had to be unrealistically perfect, they were used to judge morality. A scratch from gardening. She's too rough, nails too long, must be lazy. A bit of herbal dye on the cuticles. God forbid she actually did something. Scandalous. It was a bizarre world where doing too much meant you were crude. Doing nothing earned you grace. But you were still expected to cook, clean, care for the household, and always look effortlessly delicate. So how did women pull off hands that look like they never work? Some learned to pretend. They embroidered, but only on a small hoop balanced daintily on their lap, perfectly angled for elegance. Others practiced the gentle tea-par, heating a teapot with just 3 fingers to imply fingers long enough that they didn't need to grip. Even in art, women's hands were rarely functional. One might hold a flower, no scent, another a book open, unread, and some rested uselessly on tilted furniture, as if mid-dream, politely waiting to be awakened. As you lie beneath your warm blanket, look at your own hands tonight. The calluses, the tiny scratches, the lines and patches of lived-in skin. Because if you've ever washed dishes, written a heartfelt letter, carrying a child, or simply held someone's hand when they needed it, then by every modern definition, your hands are already beautiful. Don't let anyone tell you that beauty means being useless. Scent. In the Middle Ages, women were expected to emit a soft fragrance, pure as morning dew on the altar, chastened as thoughts not yet spoken. But they were not supposed to smell fragrant on purpose. The ideal scent was invisible, inaudible, and innocent. You couldn't wear perfume because that was seen as seductive. You couldn't emit body odor because that was seen as crude. You had to smell as if you were born of angels, but no one could suspect you used anything to smell that way. So smelling without smelling became a secret art. And as always, women had to figure it out. Many noble ladies kept sachets of fragrance tucked into the folds of their gowns. Small pouches filled with dried iris petals, musk, basil, rosemary, or orange peel. These didn't just mask real-world odors. They were said to carry the aura of virtue itself. Others slipped a few dried petals into the lining of their headscarves, so when they turned their head, their hair would softly shift. And if anyone caught the faint breeze, they'd be enchanted. Some went further, bathing in rose water. It's not like a rose shower, but steeping petals into warm basins and washing the body quietly. Part cleaning, part soul cleansing. But no one could see you doing this. If you were caught dabbing scent into your bodice, people might accuse you of seduction, or worse, of hiding some deeper shame. A correct scent drifted gently like faith, like prayer, and never caused a distraction. There were stories of women being reprimanded for smelling too clearly. One woman in France was removed from a church prayer list for bringing a jasmine-scented handkerchief to Mass. The priest said her scent made me forget the gospel. On the flip side, women who didn't smell nice weren't considered humble or neglectful. Even if you lived in a pigsty, no one cared. What mattered was that your appearance remained clean. Your outer cloak smelled faintly herbal, no matter what was happening underneath. Bathing, that was its moral puzzle. Bathing too often was frowned upon in many places, especially for unmarried women, because to bathe meant to disrobe, and to disrobe meant the possibility of temptation. So instead, women were advised to wipe themselves with cloth, steam with herbs, and then pray. No joke, some noble ladies were told to sit in a room full of dried leaves, breathe in the sacred fumes, and hum a hymn. They called it cleansing body and soul at once. Of course, no one knew if these women smelled good, but if you looked like you did, then that was enough. And if you didn't, be careful. Medieval society had a silent punishment for those who weren't scented enough. You'd be politely avoided at church. No one would ask you to dance. People would lower their voices and say, "I heard she doesn't smell very virtuous." A whisper, a glance. That's all it took to exile you because you didn't cover up your sweat glands. The scent then became a kind of invisible weapon. You couldn't be seen using it, but if you didn't have it, you were immediately judged. The fragrance was both armor and burden. Use too much and you were indecent. Use none and you lose your womanhood. And the ideal woman, as described in medieval texts, would smell like heaven itself, sweeter than June's pine sap. Though no one ever asked, where exactly was that heaven distilled from? Tonight, as you sink into clean sheets, maybe still carrying the soft scent of your laundry detergent, be grateful for the time you live in. You may smell however you like, or not at all. You don't have to smell sacred to be respected. You're allowed to smell like a person and still be treated like one. If today you can hide your hairline with bangs or style a seductive fringe, in the medieval world, you'd be judged as uncultivated. Back then, beauty standards said that the higher the forehead, the more intelligent, refined, and marriageable the woman was. But foreheads don't grow taller on their own, do they? Right. They had to be helped specifically by removing hair. One by one, every strand along the hairline, the temples, around the ears. Some even used quicklime or ash mixed with salt to dissolve whole patches of hair, all in the name of expanding the intellectual zone. That's why you'll see paintings of medieval women with what looks like a very generous forehead. It's not a mistake, it was deliberate. From the 14th to 15th centuries, especially in Italy and France, a high forehead wasn't just considered beautiful, but a sign of nobility. Laboring women didn't have time to pluck their hair every week. Only women with ladies' maids and 2 hours in front of a mirror each morning could maintain a hairline that reached almost to the crown. Some records describe eyebrow hair removal with silver razors or hot wax being dripped along the hairline and yanked off. The process was described as a pain meditation, every candle strip bringing one closer to a higher class. Of course, no one talked about the pain. The result mattered. The sacrifice was noble because a pale, high, empty forehead was visual proof that your mind wasn't cluttered with trivialities like cooking, gardening, or paying rent. Some medical texts of the era even claimed that hair growing too close to the eyebrows was a sign of lustfulness. It sounds absurd, but it was a common idea in medical manuals. Women with low hairlines were thought to be prone to temptation and needed spiritual discipline through bodily grooming. So yes, plucking your hair wasn't just aesthetic, but moral, a kind of self-purification of the head. Too lazy to do it? Fine. Don't expect to be seen as wise, reflective, or invited to the long prayer vigils. One scholar even wrote, "Who neglects the brow cannot guard the soul." It only worsens if you make a mistake with your intellectual zone. Go too far, you looked like you had a fever. Mess up the shape, you looked confused. Leave it uneven, people assumed you were pretending to be smart. There's even a story of a noble girl who had to wear a bonnet for 2 whole months because her handmaid accidentally removed half her temple. To avoid scandal, she told everyone she was fasting in silence. A fragrant lie, but effective. Unfortunately, this forehead craze didn't fade quickly. Even into the early 1500s, a high forehead was still considered a symbol of thoughtful virtue. One poet described the ideal woman. Her brow high as heaven's own light. No strand of hair clouds her mind's might. It's a chilly image, but exactly what men admired. Here's the irony. When noblemen praised high foreheads, what they wanted was a woman who was beautiful, obedient, modest, and somehow looked like she was deep in thought. But they didn't want to talk to her. They just wanted to look at her and assume she was smart. As you lie down tonight, no one is forcing you to pluck your hairline or smear lime on your scalp. You can wear bangs, let your hair fall wild and feel whole. And your intellect, it doesn't reside in the height of your forehead. It lives in the fact that once women plucked their skin raw just to be seen as worthy. In the Middle Ages, where every part of a woman's body was scrutinized through the dual lenses of morality and aesthetics, the humble neck became a dangerous territory. Not because it spoke, not because it bore the mark of a red dragon, but for a much simpler reason. It was visible. The neck lay on the threshold, not quite private enough to be concealed, yet not public, sufficient to display freely. And so it was controlled like a demilitarized zone. The ideal medieval neck was supposed to be slender, pale, and flawless, yet not attention-seeking. The art lay in revealing just a glimpse, but making others believe it was entirely unintentional. Etiquette manuals advised women to wear veils that barely covered the neck or high-collared garments with sheer lace trims. What they called veiled modesty. If your neckline dipped below a knuckle's height, you might as well have walked straight out of a tavern. And if you hunched your shoulders, that wasn't any better. It made your neck recede like you were shrinking from spiritual elegance. Conversely, if your neck is too long, you'd be compared to a swan, and not in a good way. A 15th century medical text described long-necked women as prone to sensuality, drawn to drama, and fond of debating men. Yes, they wrote that a neck too exposed, too tall, too pale could land you in dangerous territory, considered subtly provocative. And the saddest part, you didn't have to do anything. You just had to have a neck. Look closely at paintings from that era, and you'll see many noble women sitting with their heads tilted at a modest 15-degree angle, just enough to reveal a gentle suggestion of elegance, but never drawing too much focus. It was a style technique called modesty and delicacy. Some women practiced tilting their heads when greeting someone, not with a swoon or dramatic swoop, but with a gentle lean to let the neck catch the light and then disappear again. Of course, for those who didn't have the ideal neck, things got complicated. Low-necked women wore tall headdresses to balance proportions. Short-necked women wore V-cut collars to extend the visual line. And those with neck scars from smallpox, they masked them with fine lace veils and sprinkled rose water, a method poetically called scented humility. When all else failed, there was always prayer. Some hymns even included bizarre lines like, "Lord, may my neck stretch like faith, yet remain humble like a church dome." No one fully understood the logic of that metaphor, but it certainly made hundreds of young girls feel their necks weren't quite holy enough. Ironically, when men described their ideal woman, they almost always mentioned the neck, calling it a bridge between soul and body. They'd write things like, "Her neck curves like a question mark, and I long to answer it forever." This is probably why every medieval love poem contains at least one stanza about the neck, even if everyone was staring at it anyway. In a society where even a glimpse of a woman's neck could be called bold, the most desirable necks were the ones that knew when to vanish. In your modern age, skin tones can be anything. sun-kissed after a beach vacation, warm brown by nature, or a soft golden glow under spring sunlight. But in the Middle Ages, there was no room for vitality. Beautiful skin wasn't meant to look alive. It had to be milky white, pale as chalk, and ideally give the impression of slight anemia. Why? Because in that rigidly stratified society, ghostly pale skin was a declaration of high status. It silently screamed to the world, I never have to work outdoors. I don't harvest wheat. I don't hang laundry. I have no idea how harsh summer sunlight feels. Perfect skin was skin untouched by sunlight. And pale alone wasn't enough. It had to be porcelain smooth. No blemishes, no freckles, no hints of tan. And especially no visible veins, because visible veins meant blood flow and beauty at the time wasn't supposed to circulate. So women began a wild journey to bleed the color from the face. Not literally, though honestly it wasn't far off. Popular beauty rituals of the day included 1 white powder mixed with crushed gemstones or chalk applied to the face each morning. 2 lead-based ointments to brighten dark patches and oops, also cause hair loss. 3 alcohol-soaked pastes worn overnight to whiten over time, often accompanied by a pleasant tingling sensation of chemical burns. And then there was the makeup. Women would crush seashells, animal bones, and even pearls into powder to smear on their faces. This primitive foundation didn't just hide pores, it erased humanity. Some wealthy women even had maids assigned to fan their faces throughout the day. Not for cooling, but to prevent sweat from cracking the powder because one visible pore was social suicide. Freckles kiss marriage goodbye. A 14th century English manuscript declared, "A woman marked with brown upon the cheek, like a fruit already pricked, is not fit for sacred celebration. If you weren't alabaster white, you were earthy. And if you were tanned, sunbred, or heaven forbid, flushed from shyness, you were too human to be beautiful. Rosy cheeks, even worse. A flush was a sign of desire. Red equals blood circulation equals an unsettled mind. Girls who blushed in front of men were seen as unable to control their inner thoughts. It's best to steer clear. How to fix it? Add more white powder. The thicker the better. Until the air around you fogged with dust every time you spoke. Legend has it that a famously pale woman in Florence once disrupted her wedding when sweat caused her makeup to melt, revealing pink undertones on her cheeks. Rumors spread that it was the devil's mark. Her courtship prospects vanished overnight. It may sound ridiculous now, but back then a woman's skin wasn't just skin. It was a moral map. White equals noble, smooth equals pure. No marks equals no past. You might think feet are just for walking. But in the Middle Ages, they were a body part to be hidden away, like a shameful secret. Despite being the farthest from the heart, feet were still subjected to absurd beauty standards. They had to be small, soft, pale, and practically non-existent. Imagine a society where the ideal woman didn't need to walk. All movement would ideally be done via carriage, horseback, or someone else's assistance. And if you walked, oh no, you had just ruined your image. The ideal medieval foot was the stuff of legend. Small as an apple, soft as milk bread, white as porcelain, and always fragrant. Even if no one ever tested it. But what was reality? Women still had to walk on cold, uneven, muddy streets, often filled with horse. They still crossed stables, fish markets, and churchyards. And in many cases, walking was their only option. Once again, beauty wasn't found in truth, but in fantasy. In medieval poetry, a woman's feet were described like this. Each step she takes is a song, each toe a blossom yet to bloom, and her Gothic foot never touches the ground. That was the ideal. The reality, mud, blisters, and smells. To achieve the illusion of never touching the earth, many women went to great lengths to hide their feet. Floor-length gowns, velvet shoes that covered every inch, and never under any circumstances removing shoes in front of others. In some regions, exposing bare feet was considered provocative, bordering on indecency. Some even used binding methods, not as extreme as in ancient China, but tight enough to maintain a dainty shape. The result, smaller-looking feet and a significant amount of pain. Shoes were no help either. Medieval footwear had no padding, no arch support, and many styles featured absurdly long, pointy toes called poulans. A fashionable shoe could extend 30 centimeters past your toes, even if your feet were only 20 centimeters long. They weren't designed for walking. They were intended to prevent walking, move too quickly, and you'd likely trip over your shoes. An efficient way to keep women looking delicate. And if you were born with large feet, it's best not to let anyone find out. Engagements were called off over shoe size. One nobleman wrote in a letter, "She shone like moonlight until I saw her footprint by the plum tree." In some cases, feet were even inspected during engagement ceremonies, like an early version of the Cinderella slipper test, but with far heavier consequences. And of course, foot odor was strictly taboo. It wasn't discussed, it wasn't written about, it wasn't named, but it was judged. If someone walked past and left a scent behind, that wasn't poor hygiene. It was a moral failure, not body odor, but a soul out of order. So girls learned to wear their shoes. They placed little sachets of herbs or dried flowers in their soles. Some soaked their feet in mint water every night, even if the household couldn't spare the firewood to heat it, because a fragrant foot was proof of a pure spirit. A famous moralist once wrote, "The heel of a virtuous woman leaves no trace upon the dirt road, yet it imprints deeply upon the heart of those who revere her grace." Beautiful words, but if you were hauling a bucket past a cow pen, you'd leave a very real, smelly and slippery trace. Ironically, men didn't have to deal with this. No one made them wear narrow Pulane shoes. They could still run, ride or kick a ball. But women, their footwear seemed designed to fall off at any moment, just in case a prince was watching. In the medieval world, where everything from your neck to your eyebrows was monitored through the lens of virtue and propriety, weight was no exception. But I don't think it was as simple as just be thin. Number. If you were too light, you were suspect. Too fat, lacking self-control. You had to be slender, but in a planned, pious and curated way. You were expected to look like you had never done physical labor, not like someone just survived a famine. You needed to be slim with narrow shoulders, a cinched waist, and gentle curves without any visible bones, because visible bones were a sign of excessive aestheticism. A properly raised woman was supposed to be modest, but with some flesh on her. The ideal figure. Think of a Gothic Madonna statue. Serene face, elongated figure, defined waist, gentle curves, but never too round to suggest temptation. In short, a beautiful woman was shaped like a handwritten S. Soft, slightly curved, graceful, not stiff like a stick, not spilling over like a heart-baked loaf. And the funny thing was, you had to appear this way naturally. No one could suspect you were watching your diet because too much knowledge equals vanity. Too much eating equals indulgence. So how should you eat? The answer with humility. Noble women were expected to display refinement by eating very slowly, very little and daintily in public. Meals were broken into small portions, not for nourishment, but to allow more opportunities to decline politely. A lady was praised for dabbing a piece of roasted bird with her knife, then setting it down as if pondering virtue itself. Eating heartily was only excusable if you were pregnant. Otherwise, number whispers would start. She's looking a bit round lately. Or worse, has she lost her discipline? Because in that society, a large belly wasn't just about appetite, it was a moral failing. A little plumpness, acceptable if it was noble fat. Fullness in the cheeks, a soft curve to the wrist, but absolutely no belly fat. A round stomach was sinful. Shoulder fat was known as virtue fat. Absurd. Welcome to the Middle Ages. Women's body shapes were even categorized by theological symbolism. 1. Pear-shaped equals modest. 2. Apples-shaped equals idle. 3. Column-like equals lazy. 4. Hourglass equals dangerous, prone to sin. Women wore tightly laced waistbands made of leather or iron to keep things in check, constricting their midsections all day to press their thoughts into righteous form. Some even fasted on feast days, not only to repent, but to slim down for the village festival. But go too far the other way, and you were in trouble again. A woman who was too thin was seen as lacking substance, unfit for motherhood, or even spiritually drained by inner sins. A bony girl might be sent away to recover or rumoured to be involved in witchcraft. One 14th century text warned, "A woman with narrow shoulders, sunken cheeks, and a gate-like wind bears the mark of a restless soul," which was a polite way of saying, "She looks like she's about to vanish." There's a story from a convent where a girl grew so thin that her shadow was deemed unnatural, prompting the abbots to order all the nuns to eat extra lentils for 40 days to ward off the spirits. This led to a paradox. You couldn't eat too little, but you couldn't eat too much. You had to eat just enough to preserve a look of graceful purity, never enough to suggest joy. And every time you left the house, you had to hide any evidence of your body's real function. Multiple layers of skirts, a corset pulled tight, long-sleeved gowns, padded hips. What you showed wasn't your shape, it was your control. Because in that time, to be beautiful meant to exist precisely on the tightrope between desire and repentance. The Middle Ages was a strange era where women were expected to possess every beautiful feature under the condition they never actually used them. Eyes should sparkle but never look directly. Hands should be soft and slender but never do any work. And the mouth, oh the mouth, had to be tiny, delicate, silent and reserved only for smiling or prayer. A beautiful mouth was described as small as a pea, soft as an unopened blossom, and quiet as an unspoken promise. A lady who spoke too much, condemned as having a tongue sharper than a blacksmith's shears. One who laughed too loudly, said to sound like a demon strumming a lute. So the ideal woman had to smell sweet and be strictly self-regulated. Not everyone was born with a small mouth, but that was fine because they invented ways to make it smaller. Some noble women applied a paste made from animal fat and rainwater to soften facial muscles. Every morning, they'd stand before a wooden mirror practicing the virtue-pursed mouth. A look as if you're about to whisper something profound, but hold it in out of humility. In some courts, opening the mouth widely when eating was discouraged. Instead, one was to nibble. Tiny ladylike bites, lips barely parting as if kissing a silent prayer. And lipstick not any colour that made the mouth noticeable, bright red, glossy or glistening, was seen as the mark of a fallen woman. Only those in certain professions wore red. Respectable ladies used crushed breadcrumbs and apple juice to tint their lips a natural hue, as if one had just finished praying. Speaking in public rarely. If you spoke too confidently at a fair, someone might mutter, "She's got a man's mouth, a loud voice, unacceptable." A lady's voice had to be like chapel bells, soft, drawn out, and unintelligible if you weren't paying attention. Women were taught the art of proper replies. Never show teeth, gums, or smile too widely. A beautiful smile looked like you remembered something bittersweet, but decided to forgive the world anyway. Complicated enough? Let's talk about teeth. Yes, another battlefield of standards. They had to be white, straight, and barely visible. A woman who smiled with her teeth was accused of emotional excess. To whiten them, they had methods. Charcoal, crushed seashells, and urine. Yes, you read that right. Some historical records mention whitening the soul through the purification of the mouth with animal urine. And if your teeth weren't perfect, no worries, just don't smile. Problem solved. The most paradoxical part, you'd still be judged for not speaking. If you were too quiet at a banquet, whispers would begin. Surely she's plotting something. So speaking was wrong, but the silence was also suspicious. Do you see the trap? Your mouth meant for eating, laughing, storytelling, and breathing had become a dangerous social symbol. You had to own it, but never use it. As if your lips might accidentally reveal a national secret just by touching a goblet. The eyes windows to the soul. Not quite. In the Middle Ages, they were more like trap doors to scandal. In a world where women were expected to remain modest, shy, and barely breathing 24/7, the eyes were the most dangerous body part. Why? Because they didn't know how to shut up. A gaze held a second too long. Lustful, a direct stare, challenging authority, eyes that dart around, deceitful, eyes that twinkle, witchy little minks. Yes, really, Even if you tried to see who was calling your name, your eyes could be dissected like court evidence. So what was the ideal look? Your eyes had to be large, dewy, shimmering like morning mist, but never hold eye contact for more than 2 seconds. Ideally, look downward or stare wistfully into the distance as though contemplating sewing cloaks for low-income people. The perfect medieval gaze was described as one that seemed not of this world. The kind of look you might have just after leaving church, still mid-con conversation with your guardian angel, born with sharp eyes, hooded lids, a mischievous glint. Sorry, condolences. Such features were considered signs of impure intentions. Some even believed that women with a piercing gaze must have once stared into the sun, an offense against divine order. Some women used chamomile drops or groundstone powders mixed with water to soften their look to create a clear, tranquil eye. The result, redness, irritation. They'd insist, oh no, this is the glow of inner grace. And it wasn't just how you looked. Eye color also carried moral weight. 1, brown eyes, loyal but a little sleepy. 2, pale blue, dreamy, gullible. 3, silver grey, ethereal but suspiciously witch-like. 4, black eyes, dangerous, capable of stealing a man's soul. Some priests advised men not to look into black eyes for more than 5 seconds. No one trained you in proper eye etiquette, better than the medieval morality handbooks for women. 11,381 guide reads, "A modest maiden looks not into a man's face, but down upon his boots to stir the soul from afar." Oof, neck pain just thinking about it. Women were taught to avoid eye contact altogether as a form of preserving their spiritual chastity. If you locked eyes with someone, man or woman, people might assume you were plotting, eavesdropping, or about to commit something. In some circles, there was even an unwritten rule. If a woman's gaze stirred a man, the blame fell on the gaze itself. Yes, that innocent glance clearly should have known better. So what could you do? Best option, look at the floor. If you wanted to level up, you could master looking through people, gazing in their direction while mentally drafting a laundry list or calculating grain rations. Some women even practiced slow, dreamy blinking, as if communicating with invisible doves rather than actual humans. This helped maintain a distant, holy air without becoming anyone's problem. Exhausted yet? Because that's what they lived with every single day. In the Middle Ages, ideal beauty was never simple. If eyebrows had to be high but not bald, and necks long but not too long, then shoulders were another paradox. Slim, soft, delicate, but never bony and not rough like someone who'd ever harvested grain. By medieval standards, a beautiful shoulder should be gently rounded like a milk bun, sloping ever so slightly to convey meekness, and always hidden beneath layers of silk, so fragile-looking that a strong breath might blow it away. Of course, no one was supposed to see your shoulders, but just in case a breeze mischievously lifted your veil, you had to ensure the glimpse they caught revealed the morally correct shoulder. Too broad, you'd be told you looked like a female soldier. Too square, she seems like the type to talk back. Too skinny, bones visible. She's clearly been through something, unspeakable. In short, shoulders were never discussed but always judged. One noble lady was once praised in poetry like this. Her shoulders curved like grass bent by early rain, yet firm as the faith of a devoted wife. Yes, her anatomy was seamlessly spiritualized. So how do you get the perfect shoulder? Naturally, there were methods. Ancient texts suggest bathing shoulders nightly in goat milk and fresh mint to soften the skin. Some recommended warm compresses to preserve the roundness. Upper-class women preferred almond oil massages with crushed pearl powder. Great for radiance and conveniently subtle enough not to be noticed. There were also elegant shoulder exercises, rolling the joints 108 times each morning, not for fitness, but to keep the graceful energy flowing freely. But what if your shoulders weren't ideal? No problem, just hide them. Fashionable gowns featured puffed sleeves and modestly cut necklines, wide enough to suggest beauty, but always layered with lace or sheer drapery to obscure the real thing. Think of it as shoulder camouflage, a hint of allure without exposure. People even invented early shoulder pads versions. Lightweight fabric inserts tucked under sleeves to create a more rounded silhouette. It is like modern padding, but uses stiff feathers instead of foam. You thought broad shoulders were just for knights. Think again. This was a battleground of aesthetic warfare. And as always, it wasn't just about fashion. It was about virtue. Soft sloping shoulders symbolized obedience, gentleness, and a woman who was easily guided. Meanwhile, straight square shoulders hinted at a difficult personality, someone likely to debate or, heaven forbid, have opinions. In some regions, matchmakers would even feel a girl's shoulders during engagement negotiations, not to measure anything, but to assess her welly potential. No clear standards were given, but the absurdity stands. And what about men? Men could have wide, muscular shoulders, wear heavy armor, and ride horses. No judgment. Women, they had to shrink, to hunch, to soften. Never inhale too deeply if their shoulders dared rise and ruin the illusion. Because in the medieval world, even your posture had to pray for forgiveness. During this time in your world, hair is a way to express personality. Dye it, curl it, shave it off, braid it however you like. But in the Middle Ages, hair wasn't for style. Hair was sacred, symbolic of morality, and one of the most tightly policed aspects of a woman's life. Beautiful hair had to be long, thick, shiny, smooth and fragrant, but invisible. Sound contradictory? It was. And that was the standard for medieval women. Hair was both a weapon and a trap, something so potent that showing it in public could label you seductive, immoral, or even, God forbid, a witch. And if your hair wasn't long and flowing like a holy ribbon, people would whisper, "Did the Lord take her hair back because of her sins?" Yes. Your hair could be a divine punishment. In poetry of the time, women's hair was praised as heaven's golden threads, the lifeline of the soul, the web that binds man's heart to the light. Too beautiful, too dangerous. So if you were a woman of virtue, you hid it. How? Layer upon layer, veils, linen hoods, braids wrapped around the ears, long cloths draped entirely over the head. Noble women might wear up to 3 coverings to ensure no single strand escaped. In some regions, a woman exposing her hair in public could be charged with moral indecency, punishment, a fine, or social exile. Imagine going from Margot the baker everyone loves to Margot, who showed her hair at the miller's daughter's wedding. Sounds extreme. It gets worse. In certain areas, women were forced to shave their heads entirely as a way of purging temptation. Long hair was deeply distrusted in some convents because the devil might nest in every curl. Still, that didn't stop noble women from obsessively caring for their hidden hair in private. A hair care recipe from 1325 included 1, 3 egg yolks, 2, 1 spoon of honey, 3, a few drops of lavender oil, 4, and if available, ash from forest firewood. Mix it all, coat the hair, then sit before the hearth until dry. The result? Glossy velvet soft locks tucked carefully beneath a cap. Even hair pieces existed. If your natural hair wasn't lush enough, you could pad your braids with young ox hair or even hair clipped from your maid to achieve that noble volume. And there was one time a woman could wear her hair down on her wedding night. Even then, medieval guides for virtuous wives insisted it should cascade gently like water over smooth stones. Never wild, never free, never looking like a dam burst. To sum it up, your hair was a secret. Something to be admired in silence, worshipped in private, and brushed when no one could see. And men, medieval men, could grow long hair, style it, wear feathered hats, oil it with scented balms, and gallop around bareheaded. No one accused them of being vain. So this idea of modest beauty was a polite way of locking down a woman's right to self-expression. Your hair wasn't just hair, it was a leash braided in the name of virtue. Count yourself lucky if you've ever spent your morning tweaking your eyebrows. Left arch higher, right tail sharper. Because in the Middle Ages, women weren't shaping their brows to express themselves. They were removing them. Yes, completely. The ideal face of the time was smooth, high-browed, and entirely devoid of, well, actual eyebrows. Why? because intelligence and moral virtue, they believed, needed a clean canvas to shine. Eyebrows, in medieval thought, were just spiritual dust cluttering the window of your soul. Put simply, your brows blocked the light of divine grace. So, noble women tweezed, scraped, and scorched until their foreheads gleamed like the Virgin Mary's in a stained glass window. Some beauty manuals even laid out eyebrow purification recipes, such as 1. Onion water mixed with quicklime. 2. Soak a strip of linen, press it onto the brow. 3. Wait until you feel the sensation of holy correction. Then rip it off in a modest whimper cry out in pain. You'd be judged as lacking the humility required to suffer for beauty. In some regions, women didn't just remove their brows, they extended their foreheads by eliminating the baby hairs along the hairline. The higher the brow, the closer to God. The price, skin red as a boiled lobster. Portraits of noble women from the time show long faces with no brows, no hairline, just an open white field across the forehead, like a blank scroll waiting for divine revelation. And they were proud of it. One monk wrote, "The wise woman clears her brow like a meadow where pure thoughts may graze undisturbed." Not everyone agreed, of course. Some housewives were known to whisper, "Without eyebrows, how do you know if someone's angry?" A fair point. With every woman's expression neutralized, no one could tell whether you were joyful, grieving, or just thinking about what to cook for dinner. In other words, medieval women gave up the ability to express emotion in exchange for the angelic stillness of sacred art. Because angels in medieval paintings, no eyebrows either. Naturally, not all women were born with plenty of brows to erase. Those with sparse or light eyebrows had to try even harder. Some were shaved with sharpened seashells, pottery shards, or yes, this is recorded, their teeth. One noble woman was famously described as gnawing at her brow before the mirror. Others concocted folk bleaching formulas, lemon juice, belladonna root, or even morning urine believed to cleanse sins clinging to the brow. Did it hurt? Oh yes. Many women suffered burns, scarring, and even blurred vision. Still, they insisted, "At least I don't look like a fishmonger." Fishmongers had thick brows. Thick brows equals violent, equals frightening. Ironically, though, a face without brows often looked lifeless. So some women began painting them back in, but not like today's bold Instagram brows. These were faint, ghostly arches drawn with burnt almond or ink paste. Soft enough to suggest I might have eyebrows, but subtle enough to say I'm not attached to such earthly things. Confused yet? Good, because in the Middle Ages, beauty wasn't about being seen. It was about making people believe you didn't care if you were caught. If there's one thing both the modern world and the Middle Ages could agree on, it's this. Rosy cheeks are adorable. But back then, the question wasn't just whether your cheeks were pink. It was why. Were they flushed from running? Sinful, from emotion, dangerous, from makeup, witchcraft detected? Welcome to a world where 2 tiny patches of skin, your cheeks, could decide whether you were an innocent maiden or a walking temptation. In medieval times, rosy cheeks symbolized proper living and piety, but only if the color appeared naturally. That meant 1, no rouge, 2, no pinching, 3, no jogging around the cathedral to fake a glow. If you were caught using cheek enhancement, you might be labeled a seductress, a liar, or worse, a witch. One 14th century text reads, "She who paints her sorrow in blush conceals shame behind crimson lies." Yikes. Bit dramatic, even for medieval monks. But here's the twist. Cheeks still had to be pink to be healthy, so women quietly devised natural hacks to get their glow. One common trick, dab a bit of diluted wine or floral water onto the cheeks, wait 5 minutes, then rinse. If done right, your cheeks would look gently flushed, as if you just whispered a prayer in the morning mist. If done wrong, you'd look like someone slapped you with a smoked herring. Some ladies used a powder made from crushed rose petals and rice flour. The result, fragrant, soft pink cheeks that washed off in the rain. A single drizzle could turn your face into a watercolor disaster. But the greatest sin of all, visible blood vessels. You could have perfect porcelain skin, but if your cheeks showed a spider web of tiny veins, oh dear. People would whisper that you were too thirsty for earthly pleasures. Proper maidenly cheeks were like sun-kissed pastries, smooth, pink, and without a hint of veins. One anxious girl reportedly pressed cabbage leaves to her cheeks each night, hoping to drain worldly toxins. Unclear if it worked, but hey, at least she smelled fresh. And if you had acne, that wasn't just a skin air issue, it was a spiritual problem. Medieval texts claimed the face is the mirror of the soul. A foggy mirror reflects a foggy heart. Yes, one it and your moral standing was questioned. Some women washed their faces in sacred river water. Others collected dew from church roofs before dawn, claiming it purified skin and spirit. There was even a whispered belief that kissing the cheek of a virtuous person could cure blemishes. No one tested it, because if it didn't work, who would you blame? The cheek or your sins? Ironically, in religious paintings, saints and virgins always had rosy cheeks, soft like blushing peaches. So you were expected to look like a holy portrait without doing anything to look like one. Like being told to bake a cake without flour, sugar, or oven. Just make it appear natural. The nose is right in the middle of your face, largely responsible for your ability to breathe. But in the Middle Ages, it was so much more. It wasn't just an air intake, but a flagpole for your virtue, class, and maternal potential. Sounds dramatic. Welcome to an era where a woman was praised for sitting still, breathing quietly, and not disturbing the aesthetic harmony of the room. And your nose, it had to support that goal. So what made the ideal medieval nose? It had to be small, slender, and delicate, like the statues of the Virgin Mary. A faint curve, a soft tip, a bridge barely visible, like mist rising from morning dew. A woman with the correct nose might inspire whispers like, "Surely she's never peeled an onion in her life." But if your nose was big or hooked or wide, sorry. Society had a catalogue of insults ready for you. 1. Big nose, blunt character. 2. Hooked nose, schemer. 3. Flat nose, common. 4. Red nose. Drinks too much and lacks discipline. No joke, there were even personality taxonomies based on nose shapes stored in monastic libraries. Your nose wasn't just cartilage, it was moral architecture. One scribe wrote, "Her nose is too straight, too plush." The elegance of a man in disguise. Translation, even a too beautiful nose was suspicious. So your nose couldn't be too sharp, but not too fancy. The idea was a nose like a basil sprout in the morning mist. You may laugh, but people aim for that. No surgery, no problem. They got creative. 1. Some ladies wore tiny wooden nose clips, medieval clothespins while sleeping to reshape the bridge. 2. Others used egg whites mixed with herbs, hoping it would soften the nose, whatever that meant. 3. Herbalists sold holy water for slimming the nose, just mint-infused vinegar. Mostly, it just made your nose sting. In medieval paintings, women's noses were often reduced to gentle shadows. Just a hint, the less nose you had, the more noble you seemed. One man once wrote in a love letter, "Her nose like incense smoke, unseen by the eye, but unsettling to the heart." Beautiful, yes. Practical, not so much. Try living with the expectation of having a nose-like fog. And if you had a cold or allergies, or were they just alive? Tough luck. There are actual records of women being asked to leave parties for red noses on chilly nights because red tossed-drunk car dishonorable. No one asked if you were sick. They saw your nose and passed judgment. 1. Red nose, moral failure. 2. Dry nose, unfeminine. 3. Runny nose, pitiful. 4. Only the invisible nose was truly refined. Some women who couldn't achieve a transparent nose naturally resorted to veils, not for warmth, but to hide their snouts. Others practiced the 15-degree chin tilt, a strategic pose to make their noses disappear from view. And the men could have hooked noses, pointy noses, beet red noses, and still be called thoughtful, wise, or distinguished. Once again, women were judged while men got character development. Because in the end, the medieval ideal for women wasn't natural beauty. It was invisible beauty, seen only when appropriate, and preferably not at all. You're lying in bed, hands resting on your stomach or wrapped around a pillow. Look down at your hands, see that? Maybe there's a callus from work, a vein popping when you clench your fist, or a little twitch in your nails when stressed. For the modern you, that's a sign you're alive. But for a medieval woman, error. Error. The ideal hand back then was slender, pale, soft as steamed cake, without creases, veins, roughness, or, God forbid, practicality. In other words, the perfect hand was a useless one. Painful, isn't it? Because if your hands were too thin, people assumed you were sick. Too large, like a peasant's, short nails, you were using them for something, and that something involved labor which was unladylike. So, what was ideal? 1. Pale hands, preferably without visible veins. 2. Fingers long and slim like candle wicks. 3. Nails slightly long and glossy, but never painted unless you were a witch. 4. And absolutely no ink stains, no smell of garlic, no proof you'd ever touched a dish. In medieval poetry, a woman's hand might be praised as a lily yet to bloom, bright as an afternoon's dream. Realistic number, but very poetic. And to achieve these dream hands, noble ladies were meticulous. They soaked their hands in warm milk and honey, used pumice stone weekly to polish the skin, and if there was any dullness, they are dusted with powdered pearls mixed with wine. Still not enough. Some would stitch tiny pearls into their sleeves to subtly exercise the fingers as they moved, hoping to slim their joints without becoming muscular. Adorable, maybe. Even when someone broke out in a rash, they kept going. One woman claimed, "My cousin married a bishop because her hands looked like willow branches." There were even aristocratic hand training games, like holding a peeled egg for 30 minutes without dropping it. Whoever lasted the longest was said to have the makings of a virtuous matron. And fingernails, 1, ideally translucent, 2, too shiny, trying too hard, 3, too ridged, probably just carved meat, 4th, perfect moon shapes, applauded, but suspiciously so. Meanwhile, men could have sunned, darkened, calloused hands, symbols of strength. But if a woman had coarse hands, she dominates her husband. There's the double standard, clear as day. In some places, a young woman would have her hands inspected before engagement. If her palms were as tough as carved wood, the proposal could be cancelled. One tale tells of a girl who helped her mother harvest wheat and was rejected for marriage because of her hands. That's why noble women kept their hands constantly wrapped, not from cold, but to preserve their softness. No sun, no wind, no reality. They were like display pieces, polished, preserved, untouched by life. But hey, if you're lying in bed right now, your hands a little sore from a day of baking, typing, holding your child, cleaning a table, or just holding a loved one's hand, know this. Those are the most beautiful hands, because beautiful hands aren't as smooth as wax. They are the hands that have held on when needed, let go when it mattered, worked, loved, and grasped what was truly important. You're lying comfortably, breathing easily, stomach uncompressed, time unhurried, and you've wrapped nothing around yourself just to shape your figure. Congratulations! You've just accomplished one of the most forbidden luxuries for a woman in the Middle Ages, breathing with your belly. Because back then, the waist wasn't a body part. It was a moral declaration. The smaller your waist, the greater your virtue. Or so they believed. If your waist was natural, flexible, and comfortably average, sorry. People would say you lacked restraint, were too earthly, or worst of all, enjoyed life. So what was the ideal waist? Of course, it had to be tiny, but not athletic. Tiny or healthy tiny? No, we're talking barely there. Tiny. So small that when you sat down, your bodice didn't need to tighten. So narrow that a breeze could whistle through it like a flute solo in a chapel. Medieval poets described the dream waist like this. Her waist as thin as a lovelet letter ribbon. Her waist so slight, I feared my arms would purify by simply circling it. Naturally, real life was less poetic. Women didn't diet or meditate to achieve this holy waist of yearning effect. They bound themselves with cords, with cloth, with early corsets. The primitive ancestors of today's waist trainers. These early versions weren't as engineered as Renaissance corsets, but they were enough to compress your midsection into a polite whisper. Imagine long strips of fabric wound tightly around the waist, pressing organs together for aesthetics and virtue. Some girls started binding as early as 14. One bride at 18 had a waist so small it was compared to an unfried pastry. Unfortunately, she fainted at her wedding, not from nerves, but from exhaling too forcefully. Guests thought she was possessed and summoned a priest. It turned out her laces were just too tight. Others tried natural waist shaping. One, walking in circles every morning with a book balanced on their head too, rubbing herbal ash mixed with wine onto their bellies. 3, drinking dandelion water to reduce internal wind. One noble woman bathed in ice every morning, believing it would pull the organs inward. It is unclear if it worked, but she did die, not from organ collapse, but from a terrible cold. Here's the cruel irony. You needed a tiny waist, but couldn't be too skinny. If you looked frail, people would whisper that you'd made a deal with the devil. One text even warned, "A woman with a narrow waist, sunken cheeks, and hollow eyes has surely bartered her soul for slenderness." So you had to be hungry enough to shrink your middle, but still curvy enough to tastefully tempt. Too light, dangerous, too heavy, lacked grace. Church services were filled with fainting noble women, not from divine emotion, but from lack of oxygen. Sitting, standing, kneeling, bowing, all while cinched up like a viola string. And when someone collapsed, no one asked if she was okay, they whispered. She fell like a feathered angel, and not a single inch escaped her lacing. Divine. Some women even refused to remove their bindings at night. There's a diary from a Welsh noblewoman that reads, "When I unfasten my cord each night, I can feel my breath rejoicing. But I tell no one, for tomorrow I must still be praised for my posture." You see, the waist wasn't a part of the body. It was a stage-trained, tamed, compressed into an ideal that looked holy, but felt like suffocation. Imagine a world where a woman's feet weren't meant for walking, running, jumping, or balancing. They were meant to be hidden, lightly decorated, and ideally not used. Congratulations. If you're lying comfortably now, your toes relaxed and heels a little calloused from a busy day, you're living a kind of luxury most medieval women never tasted. Because in the Middle Ages, the ideal foot was invisible. That's right. A perfect foot was one no one saw, no one heard, and one that left no trace. It couldn't echo on church stone floors. It couldn't remind anyone that women move. Because if a man accidentally saw your foot, or worse, followed your footprints, it was a sign that you were too independent, too active, and not wife material. The perfect foot, tiny. The tinier the better. One text even described her foot, small as a swallow's wing, could nest in the Virgin Mary's palm. Sounds poetic, but also impossible. A perfect foot shouldn't be longer than a palm. Even if you are nearly 5 feet 7 inches, and the foot had to be 1, pale, 2, soft, 3, veinless, 4, callus-free, 5, no tough skin, no sharp nails, no trace of labor, and of course, never visible. Seeing a woman's feet was considered borderline indecent. Some towns required women to wear thick stockings to the ankle, layered with cloth shoes, all hidden beneath floor-length skirts. Sometimes a rogue wind revealing an ankle could send an entire church service into a moral panic. Shoes weren't made to walk in, but to cradle the foot like fragile porcelain. They were soft, often with absurdly long, pointed toes that curled like fashion statements. Some shoes were so tall they had to be tied to your legs to keep from falling off. The harder it was to walk, the higher your status. Being able to move easily, that was suspicious. You had intentions. Girls were trained to walk like floating, no noise, toes pointed forward, steps small as a nervous cat servant's would lay down cloth on cold stones before each step. One maid recorded in her diary, "My lady's shoes were as thin as onion skin. I had to carry her across gravel paths. When I set her down, she thanked me and reminded me to scent her soles again." Falling in noble shoes was commonplace. One woman slipped into a cathedral, landing in front of the altar. When she came, her greatest shame wasn't the fall, but that her stocking had slipped, exposing a toe. She cried and apologized to the priest for offending the congregation's purity. Even while sleeping, feet had to be pampered. Women soaked them in rose water and salt, dried them with soft linen, rubbed them with almond oil, and wore silk socks to keep them pale and scent-free. Some even tucked dried flower petals or sachets into their night shoes. Because, after all, even in dreams, feet must smell like morning prayer. But were your feet large, practical, or, heaven forbid, functional? Sorry, you were labelled earthy, peasant, or market woman. One girl's engagement was broken off because her future mother-in-law noticed her toenails were a little broad. Not long, not dirty. It's just bigger than expected. If you had calloused heels from walking too much, one remedy was a nightly paste of oatmeal and infant urine. There's no word on whether it softened heels, but you'd sleep alone. Meanwhile, medieval men wore sturdy leather boots, stomped through life, and left commanding echoes behind. But women I had to glide like holy butterflies, careful not to disturb the air. A firm step could be interpreted as spiritual rebellion. And even though feet were a source of aesthetic obsession, women couldn't use them to walk away. The perfect foot was a foot that stayed. That didn't wander. That left no trace of freedom. Lift your chin just a little. Not too high. No swan neck theatrics. Just enough to feel your neck relaxed, free, untouched by tight fabrics or sharp judgments. That right there is a luxury. Because in the Middle Ages, a woman's neck wasn't just the thing connecting her head to her shoulders. It was a symbol of virtue, elegance, and of course, market value. The long neck was honored among the many absurd beauty standards. People didn't just admire a slender, pale, graceful neck, they wanted it long. So long, one might wonder, was she gently stretched since birth? One fashion manual described it as her neck, like the wax stem of a doll. Smooth, unmarked, and fragile to the touch. That is beautiful but delicate, elevated yet impractical. The more unnatural, the more desirable. And of course, not everyone was born with a naturally graceful neck, so women got creative. 1, hair was pinned as high as possible to lengthen the neck visually. 2, chokers were worn low, drawing the eye downward. 3, gowns had oval-shaped cutouts, carefully designed to expose just enough. Tasteful, not tempting. 4, and posture always composed as though you were listening to God whispering from the rafters. There's even a tale from Flanders. A woman was once banned from church for revealing too much neck. In reality, she simply had a naturally long neck. The priest said, "Anything that tempts the gaze for too long cannot be of the Lord." So an innocent woman born with a slightly prominent collarbone became a weekly sermon topic. Women were taught to tilt and turn their heads just so. Never too fast, that's ungraceful. Never downward, that's too introspective. And never too high, that's arrogant. Only a 15-degree tilt to the right, eyes cast drayly toward a distant, unnamed kingdom. That was peak refinement. Many applied homemade neck lighteners to brighten the skin. A blend of egg whites and limes slathered on at night and washed off at dawn. The result? One woman claimed it stung like wasps in prayer. But at least her neck glowed like moonlit seashells. And what if your neck wasn't long? Short necks were thought to signify stubbornness. Matchmakers would examine a bride-to-be's neck to see if she looked tuckable. If her shoulders were too broad or her neck too hidden, she might be judged as lacking in submissive spirit. Naturally, men's necks were allowed. No, expected to be thick and muscular, praised as pillars of strength. But a woman's neck, it had to be delicate enough to look like it had never supported a serious thought. Yet even long necks weren't safe. There was a line, cross it, and you became suspicious. One Italian manuscript from the 14th century accused a woman of being a fox spirit in disguise because her neck seemed to grow longer each spring. Worse, a long neck came with responsibilities. Because it was so exposed, every flaw was magnified. A pimple, a freckle, a stray hair, all were fair game for judgment. One elderly aunt reportedly told her niece, "The Virgin sees the neck first. Keep it cleaner than your soul." So women avoided the sun, avoided side sleeping, and used special pillows to prevent neck creases. They slept like statues, unmoving, arms crossed like angels in stone. Some dabbed honey and rose water on their necks before bed, because a luminous neck was a neck touched by heaven. In short, a medieval woman's neck was not hers. It was a stage, a moral compass, a commodity. And in this quiet moment, with your neck unbothered by lace, silk, or scrutiny, take a deep breath. You're free. You're probably lying down, your hair loose and soft against the pillow. Not twisted, not hidden beneath a veil, not styled with intention, and certainly not inviting suspicion. No one glances at you and whispers, "She's trying to seduce someone." But in the Middle Ages, letting your hair down could land you in an ecclesiastical court. Because long hair wasn't just a sign of beauty. It could also be used as evidence of moral failure if you didn't control it properly. In an age where nearly every visible inch of a woman's body had to be covered, hair was strangely celebrated and forbidden. A contradiction wrapped in silk threads. The ideal woman was praised for having long, thick, smooth hair, like a waterfall of honey. It was supposed to be so long it could wrap around the waist 3 times with some to spare. Sounds like something out of a fairy tale. That's because it was. Most women in real life didn't have the time, nutrition, or soap to grow that kind of hair and still survive a medieval winter. Still, the longer the hair, the more it was seen as a symbol of femininity, vitality, and fertility. Medieval poets described it as the veil of heaven that softens dreams, golden threads that bind mortals to grace. But step outside with unbound hair, good luck. You might be mistaken for a witch who escaped mid-ritual. In many places, loose hair was seen as a sign of rebellion, unchecked lust, or even an invitation to demonic forces. Women were expected to bind their hair tightly and conceal it under headscarves, coifs, or even a layer of powder to keep stray strands from shining in the light. Even at a wedding, a bride could wear her hair down only once, a symbolic farewell to maidenhood before officially becoming her husband's possession. After that, it would be bound forever in fabric. Duty and expectation. Brushing your hair, that wasn't simple either. It wasn't about detangling, it was a ritual. You had to choose the right comb. 1. Wooden for modest women. 2. Horn for the nobility. 3. Ivory for those who didn't mind turning heads. And how many strokes? Some guides advised 33 strokes each morning. 1 for each year Christ walked the earth. More is vanity. Less is sloth. Exhausting. We're not done. Women applied beer rinses, almond oil or raw eggs mixed with white wine to adjust the shine. Too shiny. You're trying too hard, too dry, you're not feminine enough. In short, perfect hair was expected, but never noticed. And if your hair was too thick, dangerous. Some women were accused of witchcraft for nothing more than having luscious locks. A translated court record reads, "Her hair flew in the night wind, and men forgot their vows." Clearly the work of Satan. Yes, because of the wind. Some women tried to cut their hair short, but not too short, because that too could be seen as a sign of fallen virtue. You couldn't wear it down. You couldn't braid it too creatively. Anything different could end in gossip or fire. One French noblewoman once debuted a hairstyle called the spiral twist, a stylish innovation. She was immediately accused of practicing Celtic witchcraft. Her husband had to write to 3 churches to clear his wife's name over a braid. Hair in medieval times was not just strands on your head. It was a moral compass, a public threat, and a religious statement all at once. So tonight, if your hair is undone and resting freely across your pillow, treasure it. You are living the freedom they couldn't even wear in daylight. You might be lying in bed right now, your face freshly cleansed, your cheeks slightly flushed. Maybe from the warmth of your pillow or because you laughed just a moment ago. But imagine if you were living in the 14th century. That hint of color, it could be all it took for someone to accuse you of bewitching men's souls. Or worse, of being a witch in disguise. Medieval makeup wasn't like today, where you have 12 shades of blush and a lipstick collection long enough to reach Florence. Back then, women weren't supposed to wear makeup, but they were expected to be beautiful. It's a classic medieval contradiction. The ideal look, a porcelain white face, naturally rosy cheeks, flushed lips like flower petals, and most importantly, a completely effortless beauty. Because if you looked like you were trying, it meant you were faking it. Deceitful, possibly possessed. You were trying to seduce someone and probably not your husband. So how did women pull off the medieval version of no makeup? By going to painful, dangerous lengths. First, whitened skin was everything. Not healthy glow white, no bloodless ghostly white, as though you'd never seen the sun, worked a day, or set foot outside your manor. To get that look, women used 1. Bleaching powders, 2. Crushed bone or nail dust, 3. Pearl or alabaster powders. Some even applied sulfur-based concoctions to brighten dark spots. The result, skin that peeled, burned, and in some cases led to death. But the payoff was being told. She looks like a statue dressed in silk, cold, distant, and worthy of worship. Blush was also popular, but only if it looked like the blood had naturally risen to your cheeks because of your inner goodness. Not from wine, not from a walk, and not from desire. It had to be the blush of virtue. Some women mixed pickled cabbage water with wine to create a faint flush. Others just lightly slapped their cheeks before entering the church. Ask if they were wearing makeup. They'd whisper in pious tones, "Oh no, God made me like this." Lips. A gentle rose tint was acceptable. Too red or shiny, though, and you might be accused of having a mouth that invites sin. Some witch trials included evidence such as she wore an unnamed red substance, clearly not from prayer. Eyebrows, the rule was less is class. Women plucked them thin or removed them entirely to make the forehead appear higher, a symbol of wisdom. If you left your brows thick and natural, you were considered wild, primal, and likely to shout when offended. Eyes were supposed to look sleepy, soft, dreamy, just a little hollow from pious sleeplessness. Too defined. You were hiding something. To make their eyes water, some women applied onion juice. Others stared into candlelight for 3 minutes to get that heaven-struck glaze. And yet, all of this had to be secret. Because to admit to using beauty products was to say that God didn't make you perfect, and that was vanity, a sin. Worse, some women were accused of witchcraft simply for being caught enhancing their features. A court record from Bruges in 1391 reads, "She has 2 mouths, one that lies, one that smiles." I do not believe she has no ties to the darkness. Some men believed cosmetics were sorcery. If you wiped a woman's face and found someone else underneath, it was proof she had been replaced. And tragically, some women believed it too. They kept wearing makeup, not to seduce, but to survive. Because in the end, beauty in the Middle Ages wasn't for joy, art, or self-expression. It was a game of high-stakes camouflage, played in silence, under judgment, and always with a smile that said, "No, of course not. This is just how I was made." You might be lying there right now, breathing freely, not sucking in your stomach, not holding your neck up like a statue, not tucking your hair beneath a veil, or hiding your feet behind 3 layers of cloth. You're just writing fully openly without being corrected or told to look effortlessly presentable. And in doing so, you're living a life many medieval women could only dream of. If women lived like museum pieces, never allowed to pick their palette. They tucked in their bellies, tied down their waists, and hid behind veils and virtues just to survive, to be seen, not to be forgotten. But real people were behind those sheer veils, beneath the rosewater perfume and golden threaded gowns. Hearts sighing in the dark, hands gently undoing braids after mass. Eyes that knew they were trapped in a golden cage of beauty, but had no other option. Beauty itself isn't the enemy. Everyone deserves to feel beautiful in their way. But beauty as a form of control that has never been harmless. It wasn't just tradition that made women pluck their eyebrows until they bled. It wasn't a silly superstition when doing your hair could get you burned at the stake. And it wasn't random that the rules kept changing just enough to ensure women always felt insufficient. And the saddest part, some of those rules still linger. We're still told our noses should be this, or our skin should be that. We're still taught to chase impossible moving targets. And when we don't keep up, we're called lazy, unkempt, or not trying hard enough. But that's why you're here. Not to feel defeated, but to feel free. Free because you know. You know you don't have to be perfect on paper to be valid. You know you can lose weight, cut your hair, wear lipstick, or do nothing, and still be you. You don't live in an age where lipstick is a crime. You don't need to hold your breath through mass just to be called graceful. Your calluses, your complexion, or the cut of your gown do not define you. You are a person, not a statue. And beauty is not a destination. It's an act of choice. Sleep well. There is no need to hold your neck just right. No need to clench your belly. There is no need to shrink, smooth, or polish yourself into a palatable version. Just be exactly as you are, lying there alive and enough.